And I'll put this at the bottom. And then when I finish it,
We're really anti-love.
let me.
Who needs water? Who doesn't have it?
Althea over here.
Greetings, sir. How are you?
I'm not ducking you. They're keeping me busy with this.
I understand. Good to see you. What are we going to do at LOI this week?
Maybe Friday afternoon when all these people here.
Because I think the deadline is March 31st for Lily.
Oh, then we got squeeze it in.
Should it be Althea who calls us to order? As the moderator? I saw her. She has to be here before we start, so do you want me to go find her?
When I spoke in Bethlehem over 20 years ago. Yeah, a little toddler.
Do you know which is your seat? Okay.
For a moment in time, I get to boss my dean. Would the panelists please come forward? It's wonderful to see all the reunions happening, and I hate to break it up, but we are going to get started. I hear the hush coming, and thank you. Good evening, everyone. It is a joy to be here and to be participating in this wonderful inauguration of our installation of our Dean Edwin Aponte, starting with a stellar panel of persons whom I will introduce, and then I'll begin by just sharing some thoughts that help us to be oriented to the program. I'm going to throw my best questions at them and see what they come with. And then after they have responded and discussed among themselves, which I expect to be a very rich discussion, then there will be time for questions, thoughts, ideas from the audience. But we're glad you're here. Let me begin with introductions. I am Althea Spencer Miller, Assistant Professor of New Testament Studies, and very happy to be here moderating this panel. It's wonderful and exciting. We have, as panelists, sitting to my right, well, all of them are sitting to my right. Not quite far right, second one from the end, Dr. Stacey Floyd-Thomas. And by the way, these names should not be unfamiliar to you. We do read some of their literature in our classes. Dr. Stacey Floyd-Thomas is Associate Professor of Ethics and Society at Vanderbilt University, Divinity School and College of Arts and Science. She received her PhD in religion from Temple University. Summarizing Dr. Floyd-Thomas's interests is difficult to do, but her interests lie at the intersection of ethics, feminist womanist studies, Black church studies, critical pedagogy, critical race theory, and post-colonial studies with an overall approach to the study of Christian social ethics that engages broad questions of moral agency, cultural memory, ethical responsibility, and social justice. She considers the work of religious discourse and Christian faith to be inseparable from thinking about how to construct a justice-seeking community. Welcome, Dr. Floyd-Thomas. To her left, and there is no gender prejudice here, but to her left, just gender justice, is Dr. Grace Jason Kim, who is professor of theology at Earlham School of Religion. She received her PhD from the University of Toronto and has traveled a long way over the years to be here because she was born in Korea, in South Korea, or just Korea. Be awed. She's the author of 21 books, including Invisible Theology, and I should have read Dr. Floyd-Thomas's publications. We have a well-stocked group here. Invisible Theology and the Experience of Asian American Women. Hope in Disarray, Piecing Our Lives Together in Faith. Reimagining Spirit, Light, Wind, and Vibration. She's also the host of the Madagan podcast, which is hosted by the Christian Century and co-editor for Palgrave Macmillan series, The Asian Christianity in the Diaspora. There's more, but I'll rush on because we move on now to Dr. Miguel De La Torre. And he is an international scholar, documentarian, novelist, academic author, and scholar activist with a foot in writing scripts for screenplays, especially one, a documentation on immigration. He too graduated from Temple University in 1999 and has authored, I've got to take a breath, over 100 articles and published 41 books, 6 of which won national awards.
44, but who's counting?
44, yes.
The other one's last night.
The focus of his academic pursuit is in social ethics within contemporary U.S. thought, specifically how religion affects race, class, and gender oppression. He serves as professor of social ethics and Latinx studies at the Althea School of Theology in Denver, a Fulbright scholar, and you would be so right here. He has taught in Indonesia, Mexico, South Africa, Germany, and lectured in Costa Rica, Cuba, Palestine, Thailand, Taiwan. He has been the president of the Society of Christian Ethics and recipient of the 2020 AAR, American Academy of Religion Excellence in Teaching Award, and the 2021 Martin E. Marty Public Understanding of Religion Award. We welcome you all. I just paused for an embarrassing moment because see, I got this flyer with all 3 of them on it, and Dean Aponte left off his bio. So I'm just simply going to say we all know him. We're very glad you're here, and we're looking forward with excitement to this time of installation. as I said, I'm just going to frame this very briefly. The title of our panel discussion and the theme of the installation is Draw the Circle Wide, a panel discussion on racial justice and restorative work. And you would see just from the title why Dean Aponte would have been so happy to bring these colleagues with whom he has been in conversation for years on issues of racial justice in the academy and in the society at large. And it fits right in with the work we've been doing. This panel is actually right on the edge of our aspirations and a pivotal time in our Theo School as we seek to understand what it means and to imagine what it means to decenter Eurocentrism curricularly, institutionally, structurally, pedagogically, and epistemologically. So we are excited to hear drawing from the work that you have done, the publications, your wide experience, your teaching in this conversation today, because we hope and expect to glean great wisdom, insight, and ideas to project into our own future as a school, as a theological school. Welcome, and I'm going to dive right in. And you know the format. I'll just throw out the question to start, and you rev it up and keep going. So the question I'm starting with is simply this. We have talked about some of the work we have done at Drew and the kinds of aspirations we have for decentering Eurocentrism. I wonder what ideas or themes came to your mind when you heard that work, and how do you connect to it in terms of the thinking that you have done and the teaching you have done?
Colleagues, I'm going to defer to you because I'm here all the time.
Should I call?
I mean, so the question is, what comes to mind when we think about decentering Eurocentrism? And quite frankly, I find myself in a tremendous struggle. I mean, I love my Jesus, don't get me wrong, but I'm wondering if Christianity itself is part of the problem. If if Christianity is so corrupted by the colonial process and the civilizing process, that can we really decenter Eurocentrism while holding on to Christianity? I don't know the answer, I'm afraid of the answer, but that's where I have been struggling lately. I'm trying to do Christianity from the margins, from the perspective of the oppressed, but am I reimposing an oppressive structure itself that cannot be reformed because it's so deformed? Mm-hmm. So that's where I find myself now. And I really am struggling with that because, like I said, I don't want to give up my Jesus. I love my Jesus. But at the same time, 2,000 years of damage, I'm not quite sure how to wrestle with that.
Go, Grace.
Okay, thank you. I'll just tag along, but I just wanted to say thank you, Edwin. Congratulations. This is so historic. It's so exciting to be on this panel and to be invited because I admire everyone here. And I admire your work and your books and everything that you do, so it's great to be here. So I just wanted to follow up with what Edwin was saying, and I think, Christianity is a problem, I think, because of the long history of whiteness. I think that's a topic that I'm struggling with today as an Asian American theologian and teaching theology. Christianity itself, when we think about who Jesus is, he was never white. But we have this long history of Jesus being white. Is my microphone weird? Is that going? Okay. So that's something I struggle with in the classroom. How do we deconstruct who Jesus is? How do we understand Jesus from our different perspective as an African American, as an Asian American, as a Native, as a Hispanic, Latinx? How do we come to know who Jesus is? Because I think the damage is so real. You know, as an immigrant, we never, I grew up in this small 2-bedroom apartment. We didn't have anything new in the house except for our beds, my sister and I's beds. Everything else, my father found in a dumpster or someone was throwing away. But there was one thing I remember was the picture of Jesus. I think the Solomon picture, the white Jesus. And my mother hung it in our living room. And whenever we moved, it was always placed above the couch. So that's the Jesus I grew up with, this white male Jesus. And I think it has done a lot of internal damage because Jesus is not white. But I think we carry this image. I visited different countries. I went to India and I saw that same white Jesus. So we have kind of colonized, we have taken this white Jesus across the ocean into different places. And I think the damage has been done. So I think deconstructing who Jesus is, and that's why so much of my work then goes into the spirit, because then I don't really have to deal so much with Jesus.
I too just want to establish protocol as a good Baptist would, and to thank the gathered audience and Dr. Althea, but to be here this evening with my doctoral sibling. The three of us, Miguel, Edwin, and I, were at Temple in the early 90s. And to know Edwin Aponte, Edwin David Aponte, is to know someone who has always drawn the circle wide. Wide. There's never been an event or an honor where we were not doing something else in celebration, that we have not been there to support each other. And Edwin was always the first in the queue. When we were teasing earlier about gender, these two gems of mine have always embodied, atypically for the stereotype. They've been kings of love in my life. And I have hoped to be a queen of wisdom in theirs. And that is because we were in a context that we did not inherit and that was not predestined for us. Not to offend any Presbyterians present, but our path was not based on the Calvinist orthodoxy of predestination. Nothing about what we embodied or represented gave us permission to be at Temple. But we held on to each other. We were magi in some ways, looking for wisdom, looking for the star. And so that is much of the tradition that I come from, where Jackie Grant talks about, while some people might believe in this white Christ, it's the black Jesus that I hold on to. Thinking of my friend Glenn Stassen, even now, as Miguel and I are sitting here as ethicists, that he would always challenge us at the Society of Christian Ethics. You know, maybe we need to think about a thicker Jesus, you know. Are you black feminists and womanists, are you thinking about a thicker Jesus? This was his way of saying, you know, I've read you all's work. I know that there's black feminists or womanists out there. Being encouraging as a stalwart for thinking, being, and doing religion, which is what he was. And one day, we've written about that. I said, well, you know, Glenn, my Jesus is fat. P-H-A-T, right? Prophetic, historical, an advocate, and a transformer. Where I come from, which is Corpus Christi, Texas, the body of Christ, until an oil spill happened. Christ was where the crisis was. If COVID has taught us anything, much like Edwin said in his text on Santo, that there is an importance for us to realize that sacred space exists beyond the spaces and places that people say that the sacred or the divine is. He takes us into people's homes and shows us altars through this rich narrative. And what we've enjoyed, the four of us, the three of us at first and the four of us now, we do represent earth, wind, and fire. Truly, we represent earth, wind, and fire. We have a Libra, a Gemini, a Taurus, and a Leo, right? That it's the water of our faith that has kept us in the tide, that has brought us together. And COVID has taught us, in the same way millennials taught us, right? That work isn't where you go. Work is what you do. COVID showed us that, the church has to be open, even though the sanctuaries have to be closed. And to live is a sacrament. So I cannot get rid of that prophetic, historical advocacy and transformation because I've lived it in the circle. It has been my fire baptism. It has been my full water immersion baptism of faith, because it is faith of finding Christ in the crisis, of understanding the historical Jesus in this moment of Advent, a lynched Jesus in death-dealing moments. How do we minister to people? COVID has taught us that to live is to do divine work. As a womanist, as a black woman, when my students go through trauma when they take Hebrew Bible, and they realize as much as they've read that Bible they've been thumping, that there are two creation stories, and maybe this didn't happen, and maybe that didn't happen. This big river might have been just a trickle. They're devastated. And they're like, well, what about all of these miracles? How did you deal with this? I said, I know what it means to come from contexts where there are mothers who have more month than money, who have more work than a week. Every single time we see somebody win the Super Bowl who's black, or win an Oscar, which happens rarely, who's black. I mean, Oscar is more white than Jesus. The first thing that they'll say is, I want to thank my mom, and I want to thank God. When George Floyd had Derek Chauvin's knee on his neck, right? We critique Colin Kaepernick for his protesting by taking the knee. But when Derek Chauvin prayed, P-R-E-Y, on black flesh, George Floyd said, help me, God. Mama, help me. That is the Christianity I come from. That's the Christianity I try to mother, midwife, and minister to morning by morning and day by day. And I am so excited to be in this place, because the last time I was here, I was preaching and teaching with James Cone, God Talk with Black Thinkers, by invitation of Arthur Presley and your former colleague, Lynn Westfield. And so to be in this context, and he said he never felt so alive, to be able to tag team, to literally preach and then teach, and students interrogate how you made the word flesh. To be in this space where you're talking about restorative justice, I think it's really important that you do the work that Drew has been known for doing. Your giants, like Catherine and Tracy, that geniuses who have said that we need to do more than what denominationalism allows, right? Because there is a demon in denominationalism. Because we believe that our way is the right way, and yet we cannot flee from it. Because what the world needs now are the faithful. Yeah. And where are we in the public square? So, but restorative means, oh, let's just have a kumbaya moment and let's, the victims talk to the offenders. No, no, no. We need the transformative justice work that I believe that your leader has brought in the wide girth of his service and his ministry, in that we need to make sure that what we preach becomes policy. And what we individually experience changes the infrastructure of our communities. Sanctuary for me, sacred space for me, has been this relationship, right? This dance of redemption that we've done, this right relationship and faithful witness. And so I hope that doesn't get lost, because theological education is suffering, because we have more people who want to run out of the church rather run to the people who need to see a Christ in the midst of the crisis.
Thank you, colleagues, for that. I will just add, and some of this was brought up, the importance in trying to centralize Eurocentrism, the importance of paying attention to lived religion, what people actually do in their daily lives beyond what official establishment has to say. That is one place where we have the examples, we have the inspirations of what can be done. The second thing is that we, in decentralizing Eurocentrism, is paying attention to one of the things that's happening in many places, but it's happening here at True, as we encounter more and more lived faith from outside of Europe. Communities that have already begun to figure out how to decenter Eurocentralism. I think we can fall into a trap when we think that we have to do it on our own. Those of us who have our European descent, and however that is conceived, we got to fix this on our own. And then it becomes a reinforcing thing. And instead to, humble ourselves to say, there are communities in other parts of the world that are further along on this. And let's ask them, and let's learn from them. And I think that's part of the work that we need to do.
If I could piggyback on what you were saying about the lived religions, and like I said, I'm struggling with all this. Being a child of the Caribbean, we know that we could belong to several different religions, which could be contradictory to each other, but yet they live in harmony within us. So one of the things that have influenced me tremendously in the way I do ethics is more Elegua than Jesus. So the trickster has been more influential in how I do the praxis of Christianity than the actual teachings of the biblical text. So I think learning from those of us from, not just the Caribbean, but many other parts of the world, and where there is a fluidity of different customs and religions and traditions within the same individual, might be what you're talking about, this lived religion that can help us in the decentering process.
Going along with the lived religion, I think, because Jesus has been so problematic, I have moved on to the Holy Spirit and done pneumatology. But when we do pneumatology, I bring in the Asian concept of qi. And I think many of us are familiar with qi. If you've ever done Taekwondo, they talk about qi. Or if you've done Reiki, I always have some student who practices Reiki. Or Tai Chi, I think that might be the most familiar. I think once we understand that the Spirit is within us and is present among us, then this lived theology where people have different religions kind of syncretizing is not a problem. And so when people ask, how can you talk about chi and spirit, so syncretistic, so bad all the time, and I think all throughout Christianity, when Eurocentric Christians were doing theology, it was already syncretistic. When the Israelites were roaming around in the desert, their religion was very syncretistic. So it is part of our history. I think when non-whites do it, it always looks bad, right? But when white people do it, it's just the norm. So I really admire Drew. I haven't been here for, I think, maybe 6 years. I think when Dean Melanie, I don't know if she's here tonight, she invited me to speak. And just to be back here again, I look up to Drew because you are so diverse.
It's true.
In faculty-wise, staff, and students. You have international students. And when you teach at small seminaries, we don't have that. You may be the only person of color. So I really admire what Drew is doing and putting anti-racism at the forefront, because not many theological schools feel that's important. And we know if you do any type of theology, everything's intersectional. So, you and I, we were talking about gender justice today when we met, but gender justice is tied in with racial justice.
Absolutely.
With economic justice, with climate justice. So we have to work on all of this in our lived theology. Otherwise, we can't not just work on racial justice, because if you're just doing that and not taking care of women who are usually poor, who are usually going to be affected way more when it comes to the climate crisis, then you're not working on the whole social justice issue. So I love working with Stacey, and some of my other women colleagues are here, so it's great to be working with this gender justice. But we always need male workers and our brothers and sisters right here. Always you are uplifting my work, and you too, Miguel. So I'm just so grateful for us here and for you just moderating this panel. And I think the work that we are struggling with all the time, because I struggle with this as I wake up in the morning. And I remember one time I was speaking at Emory, and they said, well, why don't you just leave the church? So I said, it's not that I haven't thought about that. I think about that all the time. And Edwin and I are both PCUSA, but I feel if I leave the church, it's harder for me to then critique the church. So I stay within it. I preach in the church and I minister in the church, trying to balance the two, but it's a struggle every day when we get up. How are we going to fight this racism that hits you in the face? And during the pandemic, for many Asian Americans, and I know Drew has many Asian American faculty and students, many of us were targeted. Many were pushed and killed or stabbed or wounded just walking on the street. We are a walking target. And in that time, and during the pandemic, anytime there has been a pandemic here in the US, when there were other flu pandemics early in the 1900s, the Chinese and Asian Americans were always blamed. So when we do theology, we really need to work on this racial justice, gender justice, climate justice, economic justice, ableism, all of these, because it is so interrelated and interconnected.
I wonder if I can just do a bit of disruption here and think about the joy that this set of relationships enjoys and how it can model some solutions. But I want to invite you to dwell a little bit more in the pessimism that Dr. Torres talked about. In the living, how does that work when we have been taught that living is about being white? When the history of the formation of our doctrines come out of Europe's history, answers Europe's questions, and teach us to believe the answers to those histories as doctrine. And the epistemologies of our peoples, beyond adapting to how we have been taught to think about God and Jesus, have also found their cosmologies, their divine groups excluded as not worthy of Christian teaching. And I think about that in terms of the damage you talked about. How do we connect this joy of relationship here and the call to restorative justice in terms of the scope of the pessimism that I think Dr. Torres was talking about?
I think it starts with, whether we're talking about lived religion or whether we're talking about crisis, it starts with conscientization, right? That Paul Freire talks about, or Bev Harrison or Katie Cannon, this notion that you need to experience cognitive dissonance as the quickening of the Holy Spirit talking to you, as the collision of philosophy as a faithful search of knowledge, alongside, in tandem with, theology, which is faith-seeking understanding. Now, if a normative perspective tells you, for instance, that metaphysically, from a philosophical standpoint, race is a social construct, race is not real, right? And epistemologically, we know this because when I see you, well, people might not say that, they definitely say it to me when they're racist. I don't see color, really. Or what has value, and we're realizing this in theological education as we're deciding about different degree programs, what has value, axiological value, is what gives us more currency. But theologically speaking, despite what people say metaphysically about race being a social construct, the fact of the matter is, ontologically, racism is real. And racism creates race. Phenomenologically, epistemology is not enough. What I experience when someone says at Vanderbilt that there's been a sexual assault and the man is tall and black, and I have to pick up the phone and say, you've just described Dr. Juan Floyd-Thomas, who's teaching class right now. Or when anybody is driving while black. That phenomenologically, what happens to us, that is sacred. When you're talking about, for instance, Qi as a Chinese form of celebrating Holy Spirit. But as a Korean woman, we could say, well, let's talk about Han. So what good is Qi for Han, right? Because where suffering becomes a virtue. Or what does it mean to be Christian as a black person and your ancestors were enslaved on ships and vessels called Jesus and Mary? And then not what is axiologically valuable, but what is morally good. And that is what the love of this relationship has been. That is what the institutionalization of this whole capaciousness that you all are talking about. Literally drawing the circle wide enough so people can talk back, right? Lived religion is saying, when I can be a thinking person of faith, my conscientization is divine. And then after that, that's being born again, in my mind. When you realize that what people are telling you is real doesn't line up with your reality. And so perhaps my pessimism is not as great because I am the darkest person at the table. So when I show up, Eurocentrism is decentered because I'm in the room. And it's not so much that I'm coming here and saying, oh, I'm Rihanna, I'm Beyonce, I'm bad like that. Not at all. But literally, when I walk into a room, whether it's my faculty meeting, whether it's a first-year student knocking on my door saying, I'm here for Dr. Floyd-Thomas, and I say, okay, well, can you tell me when Dr. Floyd-Thomas gets here? And then, is Dr. Floyd-Thomas here? Yeah, I'm Dr. The dissonance, just when I'm the first text and sometimes the only text that students will read in class. So when your phenomenology, when your embodiment decenters Eurocentricity, yeah, that's a good thing. And I think that's what's beautiful about Drew is to normalize what you're calling disruption. To normalize conscientization. And then what one experiences then can talk about the project of emancipatory historiography. What happened in history that blinds us to our conscientization? What has happened within our theological, ecclesial context that have blinded us to the divine within us or liberated us, right? And then after we do all that, where do we come down? To whom are we truly accountable? And then strategize. After that is when we can strategize and then say, I can't do this alone. There's something that, to be a good Christian, you need to have some Muslims and Buddhists in your life. To truly know peace, to truly know spiritual discipline, right? But the part of the crisis in getting accredited in an association of theological schools is that they had to get rid of a lot of the standards, one of which religious heritage in some ways, because more and more Christian students enrolled in divinity schools and theological seminaries know nothing about their religious heritage. And they become easily seduced, which really is to kind of objectify other religions. See, we like to pimp out and prostitute other people's religion in that very kind of crusade capitalist way that Christians have historically oppressed people. So I'm going to take a little bit of this here. I'm going to take that kind of rape religion. Instead of saying, when you know better, you can do better. And so I think if we can understand our lived religion is inextricably linked with disruption, that when and where we who are wonderfully made show up and it doesn't resonate with that Jesus that has not blessed us, then that's the divinity. That is the scholarship of religion, that is the formation of spiritual formation, and that is what ministry and religion looks like in the public.
If my Imana is the least pessimistic person on the table,
You're the most.
I'm definitely the most pessimistic person on
I'm
the
glad
table.
you confessed that. Because I was going to out you about being the most pessimistic.
You got mad at me about my book, Hope, too. And I think,
But he's the one who uses the word hope the most. He's like, I hope that you would. I said, you what?
but he was all mad about my hope and disarray.
So, so as somewhat, well, pretty much hopeless, I mean, here's the bottom line. Neoliberalism has won. Racism has won. They're going to be around way after we're all dead. Sexism, homophobia, that's going to continue to exist way into the future. And even if we get our act together and actually do something about the planet, we're at the tipping point, or if we haven't passed that tipping point. I mean, the next 20 years or 30 years of life on this planet is going to be horrific. I am deeply hopeless. Saying that, I've been perverted by Miguel de Unamuno's works, who prays to the God who probably is not there, but prays anyway. And I love that. I mean, he talks about you can't prove that there is a God, and you can't prove that there is no God. That's why we call it faith. So I choose to believe in a God who may or may not exist. And it really doesn't matter to me anymore if God actually exists or not. I choose to believe in the existence of a God that I cannot prove one way or the other. And by doing that, then in the hopelessness of the situation, rather than having the privilege of saying it's hopeless, why bother, I'll give up, instead, I fight for justice because it defines the faith that I claim to have. But more importantly, it defines my very humanity. So part of the praxis of moving forward in the decentralizing has less to do with the Eurocentric questions of trying to prove the existence of deity, or the Eurocentric questions of using rational thought to come to that conclusion. It doesn't matter to me. It really doesn't matter. If there's a heaven, great. I walked down the aisle, gave my life to Jesus, good old Southern Baptist here, so I got my mansion picked out. But if there's no heaven, I'm not going to know about it anyway, once I'm dead. So it doesn't matter. What matters is, am I faithful to what I say I believe in?
That's exactly right.
And that's where I find myself. So in the midst of the hopelessness, it really has been tremendously liberating, because I am no longer the savior trying to fix things. I'm no longer required to make sure that everything works according to my plans. Instead, I just have to be faithful to what I have been called to do.
I hope I reach that hopelessness, because I'm not there yet. So I look with so much hope that I can try to change some of the wrong in society. So I think that's what then makes me so down. And I've cried with my friends so many times about, the problems that I face, wherever it may be. So it is with a lot of hope that I get up, and there must be a reason why I'm here, because when I think about my whole background, I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, but I am somehow here. And I never thought I'll write books because, as I mentioned, we were so poor, we didn't have any books. I remember having one book that my dad found somewhere, and I just read it over and over again. I can still picture that book because that's the only book I had. So I think, I never thought I'll write. I never thought I'll be a speaker because I couldn't even speak English. So I think it is just with hope that I get up, and something within me says, there's a reason for me to do this. There's a reason for me to maybe write or to speak. That there may be some hope, because for me, hope is not this optimistic thinking.
Right.
No, it's some push that pushes you towards working for social justice. That this can't be it. So yes, I am torn about the climate crisis because, as Miguel said, in 20 years we don't know. We're just having bigger storms. The earth is crying out. And thank you for mentioning Han, because Han is not limited to only human beings. Mm-hmm. This unjust suffering that we experience, the earth is suffering. Mm-hmm. And when we see these, torrential rains and the tornadoes that are more severe and more severe, that, for me, is the earth crying out, the Han that the earth is experiencing. This unjust suffering, crying out in pain, that so many of us women also embody in ourselves too. So it is with hope that I get up in the morning that somehow we can make some change, that we can work towards maybe fixing some of this climate injustice. And I'm so happy that Drew is moving away from water bottles and being more eco-friendly. I think these are just small steps that seminaries and churches and families and faith communities can do and implement in our lives. So I'm just so grateful to hear and learn from you. I learn from you all the time, reading your books and listening to you. So I'm just grateful to be here today.
And I think that perhaps this is this feminist, womanist consciousness coming in with the part on hope, in that I should be in Nashville right now. That's where I live. I have a 14-year-old daughter who goes to Harpeth Hall, which is 1 mile away from Covenant Christian Presbyterian School. One of her classmates' little sisters was a victim in that shooting. My house sits in between where that happened and where my daughter went to school. I was in the air during the shooting, getting my 20 minutes free of Wi-Fi with American Airlines. My husband was driving my aunt down the very road where cops were swarming around. He had no idea. I was in the air. I get a text that says, there is a shooter on the loose in your neighborhood. My husband didn't even know what was happening. We pray for my daughter, my husband, myself, and my sister every morning before she goes to school. And I felt the relief when I knew she was fine, the hopelessness in that it could have been her. And that it wasn't my prayers that just protected her. Because that could have been random. Prayers don't do that. But what our faith does for us, in the same way when a mother wants to die in giving birth, hope makes you push past the hurt. It was hope when my mother died, and I felt rootless. My mother-in-law died January of 2017. My mother died December of 2017. They went to the hospital at the very same time. My husband hadn't told my daughter when they came to pick me up that, oh, Grandma, Mimi just died. Get in the car, I tell my daughter, Mimi just died. And I'm thinking my world's gonna fall apart. And she says, Grandma died in January, Mimi's died. And I would have never framed that. That's a child of a historian, obviously. And I said, isn't that just like Mimi? Before your hurt could heal, she jumped in it so you didn't have to go through this suffering again. What am I meaning by that? There's a way in which women who embody life rather than death, often in the face of death, know how to push past the hurt. That when you're depressed, because you might have suffered a death in your family, that you push past to live on, to be with those who have given you life. That's what hope is. It's not this kind of pie in the sky. It's what is the ethic? What is the agency that you have when you're faced with death-dealing hurt? If hope is that kind of lived religion, not this pie in the sky, not this realized eschatology of, milk and honey, blah, 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 but actually, when the Han is there, your agency becomes the chi, right? When you're on the brink of death because your body is being ripped apart by something that seems more of a parasite than a gift. And the midwife says, push. That is the hope. And it's those kind of embodied intersectional experiences that we have to share. And part of what we don't do as marginalized people is use our stories as the sacred text, which you have done so well, Edwin. Whether it's the stories of growing up, whether it's the stories of being Puerto Rican within the U.S. mainland context, and people experience dissonance as if that is not what it means to be an American, or what it means to be a person of faith and a scholar, or a scholar, and how dare you be an administrator, and how are you not selling out to one by being the other. Sharing these stories needs to be our starting point, rather than the theology and the normative ideologies of somebody else that makes us just become a darker patina on a white happening.
Right.
And so if we start with those stories, because it's when a student hears what you say about growing up with nothing in one book, that they see their hope. And they found their help in your story before they've taken your first class. And that is lived religion.
Right. That's right. That's right.
And don't get me wrong. There was this individual I walk the migrant trails every so often, and there was this individual who began the trail, and when you begin the trail, you bring 2 jugs of water to last you for the walk that could last several days. And he said that when he began the trail, he tripped and fell, and the 2 jugs of water burst, and he lost the water. But then the Virgin Mary appeared to him and guided him to our camp where we had water and we could take care of him. And when he said that story, what the professor in me wanted to say was, well, you know, great, the Virgin Mary appeared to you, but what about the other 5 brown bodies that die in the desert every 4 days? Where was the Virgin Mary for them? But instead what I said is, Gloria a la Virgen, you know, hallelujah, you know, and I celebrated his faith and his hope. And I say that because when I talk about hopelessness, I'm not talking to him. He's not my audience. I am talking literally to the gang members in the Latino neighborhood who literally don't see any hope in the future, to tell them that's okay. Because there isn't, the way the structures are designed against you. When I began dealing with this when I took a group of students to Mexico and went to a squatter village. And in the squatter village, there was, you know, afterwards, you know, my students unpacked what they saw. And one of the students said, oh, but when I looked into the eyes of the little girl, I saw the hope in her eyes. And at that point, I really had an epistemological meltdown, because what I responded was, I don't know what you saw in her eyes, but she's going to be turning tricks in about another 10 years to put food on the table. There is no hope for her. There is no hope for her or her children's children, because they are stuck in a social structure designed to keep them oppressed. So what I'm trying to do is, once we embrace that hopelessness, once we realize we have nothing to lose, that's when we become the most dangerous.
Right.
That's when radical praxis begin.
And I guess that's where we differ.
Yeah.
Because I think that it's when you have something to lose, from a mother's perspective, that you actually make the impossible possible. See, it's because life is on the line. It is because there's something that is an ultimate concern, rather than somebody's structures, rather than somebody's opinion, that makes you strive to do the impossible. So when you talk about gangs, for instance, the reason why the biggest institutions in some black urban context are prosperity gospel churches and gangs is because both are dealing with something that is real.
Yeah.
Prosperity Gospel Church will say, oh, well, you can get this money and you can get this free health care, and they literally are providing. So mainline churches, I want you to hear this. You can talk about prosperity gospel, you can talk about gangs all you want. The reason why prosperity gospel churches are growing larger than any mainline church is because they're actually delivering on something. By tricks and everything else. And gangs, where young people are giving up their lives, also deliver, because they're willing to go by those rigid guidelines if it means that it's a life for a life. I know I'm going to have my back. The issue is, it's the ethic, not just the idea of hope. In these situations, people are striving to address the reality of situations.
If my child's life is in danger, I will not be radical. That's what.
Well, that's where we differ. That's where we differ.
To protect the life of my child, I will domesticate myself, because. But if I have nothing to lose.
That has not been my legacy. That has not been.
I wonder if I can just come in now.
This is good.
I mean,
Yes.
I mean, that's not
I wish we had gotten to this heat a little while ago, but we know we have such a wonderful array of options to speak to because of what what we have heard. And I want to open it up to the audience for another 15 minutes to get your piece in. Come on. First one. Oh, shucks, and I interrupted them for this.
No, it'll start back up again, so promise. Dr. Bridgman.
Dr. Bridgman over here. And I forgot to welcome you especially. We have Dr. Valerie Bridgman in our midst, who is Dean of Methodist. Okay, she said no.
She was happy because she was off tonight.
Please don't do that. What I'm struck by in the conversation is the mosaic that is in front of us. So the whole notion of decentering whiteness is a picture in front of us. And the difference in where you stand around hope that we just saw in that conversation between Miguel and Stacey is decentering whiteness. Because the presumption is that you all should agree. Would be the white assumption. Whereas I'm sitting here going, yeah, both of those things is true.
Right.
Depending on when you ask and under what context and blah, blah, blah. So I just wanted to acknowledge what I'm experiencing in this moment with you all. And that's literally all I was thinking.
And if I could add, not only do we disagree, but we love each other because of the disagreement.
Because of the disagreement. Because that makes you faithful. And that's what a real solidarity looks like. That wide circle.
And white ecclesiology is if you don't agree, then something is wrong with you, and we can't possibly have unity or solidarity because you don't agree. And the unspoken is with me.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because actually many Asian Americans feel that all the time. We need to be always because, oh, the white people are watching us. So thank you so much for pointing that out.
Yes.
And for the record, I don't always agree with myself either, so.
That's why you have so many books. Yeah, that's why you have so many books, because you got to contradict yourself and then do another one. Yeah.
Well, don't
We
forget,
see the pattern.
Elegua is my guide, and Elegua never always says what's real.
We have a question.
Yeah, I appreciate the framing around embodied or lived religion. In the black church, the mothers, the church mothers, they may not know who Kant is or Barth or any of these theological constructs that we get forced to learn in seminary, but their lived experience is the source of their hope and the source of their faith. And I think sometimes theological education distorts that lived religious experience. But that is the backbone, that is the strength of the black church, those church mothers who know that their prayers have been answered. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for that. And I want to applaud not only that observation that you made, but also the challenge that the most significant black movement and institution in the world is the black church in the United States. And that movement is made up of 80% women. So the largest movement in modern history for black people is made up of 80% women, but it usually has a male head, which does make the black church monstrous for the mothers within it. So last week, the circle at Vanderbilt got drawn a little bit wider when I'm a fangirl of your professor, Tracy West. She came. And if you think Miguel De La Torre is a hot mess, well, you know, I'm looking for, I love her. I love her. I knew her in print before. It's wonderful to fall in love with somebody in the Word before you meet him in the flesh. So I've loved her since forever. And she just came to my house right? To my school, Michael Eric Dyson and I are up there like little geeks, and Dean Towns is cheesing, and she's excited that Tracy West is in the room, and we don't care about any of the students getting their way to her. We're blocking, you know. And then she says, I'm the only Christian social ethicist. And we're like, yes, she's the only Christian social ethicist. She said, who would tell you to get rid of love. And then I said, well, Holy Ghost, you know, this is just. And because the way in which love, much like slave, much like servant, has become so revered that it actually has people allowing their bodies to be broken. It becomes a demonic force. So part of this work, again, conscientization is necessary, right? Or what's the saying, when you see the Buddha on the road, kill it? When you find yourself institutionalized, and I'm going back to theological education, you know, celebrating the administration of this wonderful dean. The biggest problems in theological education are faculty. Why do I say that? Staff, they're front-facing, right? They can get jobs anywhere. They can work in corporate America doing what they do. They can, you know, work in the church doing what they could work anywhere. Students, this is like public housing for you all. It's supposed to be. It's supposed to be transitional, right? Does anybody know about public housing? In public housing, you weren't supposed to paint. You weren't supposed to hang paintings, right? Much like military life. I was a Navy brat. And so they would tell you that you lived in this transition. Don't make a home out of a house because you're going to be moved. And that's, if you have a good mentor or good advisor, we're trying to move you through, right? But who remains? Faculty. We are institutionalized. We think that print's getting smaller. Students are getting younger. And we don't realize that we're older usually until we go see a doctor. And they're telling us about our hypertension, da 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 da. So why am I saying that? When you are within a sacred place that is made of brick and mortar, check that your identity is not more aligned with the brick and mortar as it is with your best intentions of what caused you to start this profession. There's a way in which black women have loved the church to death that it has killed them. There are ways in which we as faculty love our ideas to death, and we miss the people that we're teaching. So this issue of restoration is really this infleshing of Santo, making of carved objects that we create as icons, literally infleshing it in our own stories with our own people, right? Rather than the jargon or the rhetoric, or getting the acknowledgement from this institution, that institution, you know, this position, actually having people who don't get lost in the translation or the transition, but are actually trying to move you through life. And that's the work. That's the work that I think that we've done here. That's the work that our souls must have, and that has sustained us in conflict, right? Because we find ourselves in crisis, and that has given us a sense of community to keep each other true. So when you know somebody before they have these books, before they have these positions, see, after 30 years, then that person can say, remember Edwin in that class when you said, people who will keep you true to your better self.
I think that might be a point at which we might have to end. There are so many issues that have been raised for us. I just am going to recite some that I have here. Again, is Christianity part of the problem? Can we actually descend to Eurocentrism? What does it mean in the light of that to understand Jesus from our different perspectives? If Jesus is not white, what is the damage? the sacred takes us into spaces that have not been regarded as sacred. Work is not where you go, it is what you do, and to live is the sacrament and so much more. And I'm going to flag epistemology versus phenomenology and hope I'm not framing it in a white way. But I'm also, by oppositionalities, but I'm also going to ask the question as we leave. We don't have time to answer it, but you'll be eating. Talk about this as you eat. What does it mean to be a white person and listen to all of this? What does it mean for you? What changes does it call you into? Can you sit there satisfied to have listened without wondering how the lines are being redrawn? And that is one of the big questions. But so it's a conversation. And then to invite you into conversation with our guests who are here and our dean to see how much we can deepen and just probe the things that we have talked about. Thank you all so, so very much.
Thank you. Our dean, our dean, our dean.
Just good, thank you. A word of thanks to the panel for all of you coming here. We do have a reception downstairs. You can go right down the steps or the elevator a little bit to the left when you leave Craig Chapel. And by all means, continue the conversation over the reception. Thank you.